princesses in this.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. It's great to see you. I hope you have your wine. As you can see, we've got ours. Looking forward to telling you a little bit about it and spending the next hour with you. A special welcome to those that are greeting us, joining us live, but also for all of you that watch our videos after. Do you know we've got hundreds of views after the fact?
Yeah.
So thanks to all those that are watching us. I hope, be it with a coffee or a tea, or maybe in the evening with something stronger, you enjoy. Ribena, you enjoy the next hour with us. I am Kristen, the GM of Hatch. Co-founder, GM, and we've been around, 3 years now doing this thing. Natalie is the head of experience and product. For anyone familiar with Hatch, she's kind of designed and put this whole thing into the wild, as we call it, for your wealth building. So at Hatch, we have a real mission to have every Kiwi be a millionaire, or at least build life-changing wealth. And so we're offering access to world-class investments. That's really important to us, but also to education and community. That is super important. So you are our community, and tonight we're going to have a bit of education. We're not offering advice. If you have got some really specific questions, there are fantastic financial advisors. Mary Holm has a whole website on really great financial advisors in New Zealand. But we're just really chatting about general tips and tricks of investing. And tonight, chatting about how to invest and do good. And so we'll be chatting a little bit about that. We want to talk about sustainable investing, socially responsible investing, the difference. Can we make money by investing and doing good? And then, of course, how to get started, because we want you to walk away having some really actionable tips on this. But before we get started, we obviously, the elephant in the room is a big thank you to Domain Road Vineyard. It's a family-owned vineyard in central Otago, and when we told our Hatch Investors Club that we were having their wine tonight, they said one of the truly great central Otago wine businesses. So, and it is. We've had a few sips, and it's fantastic. I'm drinking their 2018 Chardonnay. Nat has got their 2018 Pinot Noir. Love Kiwi wines. Love Domain Road. They've also provided these incredible wine glasses. It's not a it's not a virtual effect. Like, these things are enormous. In fact, you can fit almost a bottle of wine in them, which is we haven't selling point in itself. But we're actually doing a giveaway for a pair just like this. So you are all in the draw to win as part of attending tonight, and we'll let you know via email on that. But let's get down to business, because here we're going to talk about how to invest and do good. So Nat, tell us some of the ways. We want to talk about that tonight.
Okay, so there's a whole bunch of terms that people use to talk about socially ethical, sustainable, responsible investing. There's a ton of them. And most of the time we find, and we're guilty of it as well, people use them pretty interchangeably. It's kind of hard to differentiate between them, but there are a few differences. So firstly, sustainable investing, which we'll talk about in detail a little bit, is basically just plain good investing. It's the idea of investing in good, solid businesses that have great environmental, social, governance practices that means that the business is probably going to be around for a while. So the goal of sustainable investing is very much it's kind of money focused. It's to invest in something that you will have sustainable returns from, and your money will grow because you have invested in a business that is doing all the right things to stick around for a while, but probably grow, which is really good. There is a little bit of a crossover with ethical investing when it comes to that, and we can talk about that later, but really the primary motivation behind sustainable investing is to invest in solid, good companies. And we talk a lot about investing in quality companies, and this gives you the ability to figure out which companies, a framework to figure out which companies are those kind of great quality, sustainable companies. Secondly is socially responsible or impact investing, which is slightly different from sustainable investing. And this is where your individual ethics come in. So sustainable investing is just good investing in quality companies. Socially responsible or impact investing is where you want to do more than just grow your money, and actually sort of growing your money becomes secondary to making a difference. So this appeals a lot to people who might be more likely to buy clothes from someone that comes from a sustainable source, or buy food that's organic. So people who really want their money to go towards making a difference. And there's two ways that people can go about this. And again, we'll go into this in more detail soon. The first way is that you invest in things that take out the bad stuff. So in New Zealand, we have kind of, I think, a fairly unified set of ethics that Kiwis sort of agree on, which is things like we don't like nuclear weapons.
A big one.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Things like gambling and alcohol, that they're kind of considered bad or unethical. And some of us don't mind. But investing in those companies as a general rule, which is why in a lot of Kiwi savers, they remove that stuff. So part of socially responsible impact investing, the first part is removing the bad stuff. And I say bad because, again, ethics is something that is unique to all of us. But as New Zealanders, we've sort of agreed on a few things. So that's one part of socially responsible or impact investing. And the second part is proactively investing in good stuff, in companies that really, really support our ethics and things that we really, really believe make a positive contribution to society. So, yeah, so two completely separate things, but they do sort of interchange, which we'll go into. Good investing in quality companies and things that reflect your ethics.
More values-based. Okay.
Yeah. So maybe maybe a good start is for you to talk a little bit more about sustainable investing and how would you know a company is sustainable?
Yeah, there's if an acronym, as there's so many acronyms in this industry, is ESG, and some people may have heard of that. So we want to kind of demystify what that means and how might you kind of look for ESG, and should you care about it, and what that is. So I think what I have seen is ESG is used interchangeably with sustainable, obviously, because it follows that practice. So ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. And there's kind of their factors, and we'll talk about, Nat will kind of talk about some of the stuff that's underneath each one of those. But it really is a score-based framework. And so a company gets a score based on these environmental factors, social factors, and governance factors. And that basically tells us how sustainable the company is. And so how likely is it going to be around in a long, long time with using kind of those same practices, not changing. And therefore, like Nat said, if we kind of believe the business itself is sustainable, it's probably going to grow and deliver good returns for investors. It's not perfect. I don't think there's, we know there's not like this perfect, standardized, agreed upon framework, but I think it's a fantastic start. If you were to look back 10 years ago, there's no such thing as, well, I should say in kind of an everyday investor language, ESG wasn't a thing. So I think what people have realized is there's this big desire of push to kind of understand we're shareholders in these businesses and companies. We want to own slices of the businesses, and we want to know that they're doing good. And these things really matter to us. And so Nat's going to chat about each one. So I think, there is this real movement towards climate change. Obviously, we knew Black Lives Matter was massive in 2020, and so the racism matters to us. Pollution, are we doing all that we can do to address pollution? It's really important. Diversity is obviously 2 women leaders in a business. We love kind of to see diversity and recognize that's a good thing. So I think there's changing buying behavior in shopping, and we're seeing that move over into the investing world, which is really cool. So ESG, environmental, social governance. Nat, do you want to just tell us what are some of the things that this framework, I should note, the lower the ESG score, the better, because it's kind of a risk thing. So it's like this business is at risk or exposed to risk of kind of doing not being around. And so that's how we capture it really easily. And so, you might think the higher the score, the better, but in this case, the risk is lower. ESG score, the lower, the better. And we're going to talk about that in a bit, but tell us about kind of some of the things that might fall under that framework.
Cool. Yeah. So environmental, social, governance, and again, all of these things are, like Kristen says, risk factors. If a company doesn't perform well on any one of these things, it is a risk that they may not continue in the future, because these are the things that laws are changing, buying situations are changing, buying power, buying decisions are changing based on these trends. So environmental, obvious, it's the way we treat the earth, and so it's the way these companies, the impact they have on our planet. So that's things like how much they contribute to climate change. Are they a huge polluter? What is their impact on our water supply? Are they polluting our water, or are they protecting our water supplies? Do they contribute to deforestation? Again, as you'll note, a lot of these seem to have somewhat of an ethical slant, but it really is any company involved in some of those environmentally damaging practices probably won't be around. That, like, we can see around us in the last few years especially, laws are changing, and a lot of things are changing around our commitment to reducing the impacts of climate change. So a company that's actively polluting is probably not going to be that impactful in the future. It's probably not going to grow. It's not a quality business. The next part, so we've got environmental, the next part is social. And that's the impact on society, which again, you can notice some really clear trends in society that would indicate that companies that have, they're putting themselves at risk if they're not conforming to good practices in this area. So that's things like having good working conditions, child slave labor, or general slave labor, paying people fairly. How do they treat local communities, including Indigenous communities? How do these companies
feedback?
And diversity. What is their situation with having diverse leadership? What are their hiring practices? Health and safety, and especially this is a big one these days, is how do they deal with mental health in the workplace? Burnout is real. And we know, and everyone watching will know, as people who are employed, you actively are trying to look to work for companies that really take care of your health and safety, which means the best people are working at the companies that promote this stuff the best, which means they're quality, sustainable companies. And again, things like companies that deal with weapons or promote war, like that's, I mean, where's that going to go? And then the third factor is governance, which is probably one that I didn't know that much about before starting at Hatch, but that's things like the executive pay. Like there is, as we all know, a huge and growing gap between the rich and the poor. How much of these companies, is it fair how much their executives are paid versus their general employees? Are they involved in bribery and corruption? And that seems like a silly thing coming from New Zealand, but the world is a big place. And again, on that governance level, is it a sustainable company to have a board that is stale, pale, male? Or do you want to invest in companies that have a diverse structure? So again, you can see in a lot of these things, they have an ethical slant, but it's important to remember that when it comes to ESG, they are given a score, not because of what they do as being ethical, but because it is a sustainable practice that will lead to your investment money going up in the future and them thriving as a company.
And I would say, thankfully, most people would think this is kind of ethical, but you're right, that's not the point of the framework.
It's not the point, but it is. There is crossover, which we can get into. So I suppose, like, having gone through all that, I wonder if it's worth maybe you talking a little bit about, like, how would I as an investor use that ESG framework to make a good investing decision?
Yeah, good. And thanks to Kessica, because she's actually asked the same thing, or he. They're wondering about where I can find these scores and is there a rating. So there is.
It's always a shortcut.
I know. And the great thing with data, and I guess it's this big democratization of information with investing, as we're no longer in the dark. We can make active choices as self-directed investors, and we can do all of our research. And this is part of it. But the reason why we can do this is because, do you know it's really hard to get your company listed publicly? On a share market. So if a company sells its shares to people, you have to disclose tons of information, and
more than people think.
Tons of information, not only when you're listing, but ongoing information. You have to have audits, you have to disclose earnings reports, and all of those practices that we talked about above. If you don't, it's likely you're going to get a higher score because you're not transparent.
It's a risk if you're not transparent.
Exactly.
For sure.
So there is, I guess what the point I was trying to make is that, thankfully, a publicly listed company has all of this data that's very visible, and you can actually, there's a business called Sustainalytics ESG risk rating, and Haley's going to pop the URL on the screen, and probably, hopefully, in the comments. We'll do that. We'll put it in the comments as well. But Sustainalytics, is that Sustainalytics ESG risk ratings is the company actually that I've even seen Yahoo Finance, for example, pull that through. And what you can do is, it's a fantastic website. You just type in the company name, and up will pop the ESG rating, which is great. The shortcut to do that, if I'm not saying it properly, Sustainalytics, is just type in I don't know, Lululemon and ESG score, and it's likely they'll come up at the very top. And when you click on it, it'll show the score of those overall ESG ratings. And then you can start to play and type all sorts of different companies. And on that, actually, I'll give Lululemon as an example. They have a score of 13. So what does that mean in the big scheme of things? Well, anything, there's kind of ratings. We talk negligible, like really low risk, is 0 to 10.
Which means they're probably a high chance of being around and thriving in the long run.
Yeah, low is 10 to 20. A score of medium risk is 20 to 30, and high risk 30 to 40, and severe. So that's like this has got probably some risk in this company. So recognize the risk you're getting into is severe, and that's 40 plus. So let things kind of roll. Let's just say between 1 and 50, or 0 and 50, I should say. And Lululemon is considered low, and they're sitting at 13. So it's likely that all of the information that this framework is overlooked. It's probably, let's just say, I mean, I'm going to guess, but it's likely that their distribution probably, hopefully, has minimal impacts in the environment. Sending clothing everywhere, or potentially they offset their carbon footprint. It's likely they procure fabric sustainably. They're probably looking at good ways to do that and become more efficient. They have some good
community things, like they have the yoga classes.
Lots of great community in terms of giving back to communities. It's likely they're diverse. I mean, it feels like it's a company that you'd have a high level of minority and women working in.
And I love that, because that feels like it's not about whether or not they're great or bad. It's like those just lower the risks of them going bust at some point. Well, they're doing all the right things.
I think it's that mission and vision. And if you're investing in a business, definitely seek out who is running their company. What's the mission and vision of the company? And I think we know their mission and vision. If you have their one on the bag that you walk around, like, we kind of know their mission and vision. And as long as they're living it, I should say, and authentically living that vision, it's likely they have really great mental health practices. So all that sort of thing. I do think that that makes sense. Lululemon's there. Great. Let's use an example of an oil company, Exxon. If anyone was around and as old as I am, you'll remember the Exxon oil spill back in I don't even know what year. Exxon Valdez, were you around for that?
I don't know. I've heard about it a lot.
She was a baby. I was around for that. I probably wasn't born.
It was probably in the 90s.
They have a risk score of 34. This doesn't mean don't invest in oil. It just means be conscious that when you're investing in something, that's part of your risk scores. Their ESG score is 34. So I don't want to come off all judgy and do this, do that.
I think, again, it's not about ethics, but if you look at where the world is going, we are actively reducing our reliance on oil. So it makes sense. So if might be a bit risky.
So 34 is considered high risk. And so it's kind of obvious. You think, well, they're in oil. It's likely uses masses of energy to produce this stuff. It's likely distribution is hugely expensive. I don't know how they run their business. There's probably all sorts of reasons why their scores for 34 and high, all sorts of reasons. But I do think that it doesn't mean that Exxon can't in the future look to renewable forms of energy, and they very well might be. It can lower that ESG score, but it just is what it is.
It's not good or bad. It's just at the moment it's quite risky in the long run, because they haven't done that stuff yet. It's just quite a nice framework when you look at it like that.
Yeah, exactly. So we know kind of where we can find that score, and generally speaking, what it means. I think it's kind of a really great start to empower ourselves. How can we invest in ESG? Do you want to chat about that one a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So we're, as we said before, all about taking shortcuts, and I think ESG is one of them. So nice to have a framework, and I think the examples you just gave with Lululemon is a lot of our customers invest in Lululemon, and I think it's so nice that kind of gut instinct you have. You've got a really nice way to score that, like, oh, this feels like a low risk long-term investment or a lower risk long-term investment. So so that is one way you can do it. You can invest in an individual company, and the easiest way to do that, as always, the shortcut is you Google the company's name and add ESG on the end, and you'll get a website like Sustainalytics. Yahoo Finance has it, and it will give you that score. There are multiple, like you'll see in those search results, you get the score, but you also will see multiple websites where you can start to dig into why they've got that score, and they can prove us right or wrong with our analysis.
But I think also Google things like why does Exxon have a bad ESG rating, or why does I don't know, I'm using those two examples, but there's a million companies.
Any
What's
company.
Apple's ESG and why do they have that rating? Because the great thing, again, about information online is some analyst, and it's likely on Motley Fool or Bloomberg, one of those sites, has a person that's told us exactly that. And actually, we'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, agree.
And I think this is brilliant because we talk a lot about how to get started and how to choose a good company. What a genius, quick solution. And I think especially when it comes to individual companies, a little known fact, and one that I didn't know until recently, is ESG was sort of brought about as an extension of the traditional sort of financial analysis. That back in the day, people just used to look at financial reports, and this was considered a more holistic way of sort of analyzing how risky a company is to invest in. So what a quick, easy tip to just start looking into companies that you might like.
No, I agree. Now, don't judge me, but I probably am not going to choose my companies on ESG because, it would be interesting to know because I just like if there's a company I want to invest in, I want to invest in it. Like but that's okay because companies for me just maybe, you know, if I were to look at my portfolio on Hatch, like probably only 20% of my investing goes into companies. And that's just because I like kind of what they're doing. If they happen to be doing good, that's great. I mean, I'm not investing in cigarettes and nuclear weapons. So I've got I'm not.
I mean, I'm invested in a casino.
Oh, okay. Well, judge her.
It's in Vegas. No, I love Vegas.
But anyway, my point is I invest mostly in funds, and there's no reason why my funds can not be ESG. I'm actually quite. So how do I do that?
So I think there's 2 points there. One is that ESG is just a measure, and again we have to go back to that risk thing, not it's right or wrong. So your gut instinct, I am judging you, but your gut instinct when it comes to a company, all ESG is saying it's lowering or increasing the risks of that sustainability. You can back yourself on that as well. But when it comes to funds, which is actually quite a common way for most people to invest, a lot of money through Hatch is tied up in funds. There are 25 funds on Hatch. If you search for ESG on Hatch, there are 25 funds that come up that you can
just search ESG.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you can just start to look at them, and someone's already done the work for you. You can invest in one of those funds, and there is ESG screening over the top. So someone's already done the work. There is a list that follows to say if they follow these scores, they are added or removed from the fund. One thing to keep in mind with that, and again, this is not something to get too complicated on or to sort of wind yourself in knots about, which is a common thing investors do when they start, is that different funds have different ways of deciding what goes in and out. And when it comes to ESG, like you said, it is not a hard and fast science. There is not, it is a way to determine the risk of investing in a company for the long run based on great business practices. So there are 25 funds on Hatch. They have different ways of choosing what to include and what to not include. So some might say we're going to include that sort of scale that you said before. They might include companies that have a score of 20 or below, whereas other funds might only include companies that have a score of 10 or below. So you could get really uptight and if you want to, and you have every right to, you can go dig deep and you can Google the funds and you can compare them. Absolutely. Or you can take the philosophy of there's 25 funds and there's a ton of money going into these funds that are working towards a better future. And yes, they may not have it perfect, but they're making a start, and just pick one. Another thing that might be a difference between funds is one of the cool things I like about ESG is it's not just a rating based on what they're doing now. A company like Exxon is probably a good example, that they are heavily reliant on oil right now. If they have a solid plan that they're saying we're actually shifting from a reliance on oil and our business is converting to more sustainable energy sources, that some funds can choose to include those companies because they have a clearly stated plan, which means you don't have to, it's like, I really love something that's not black and white, that gives you the ability, because everything in the world is a bit gray. And yes, you can go hard if you want to, or you can say, I'm investing in things that are doing the right things, and nobody's perfect and nothing's perfect. So yeah, have a look at those 25 funds. And again, Google is your friend. You can Google the fund name in ESG. You can compare ESG funds. there's a wealth of information on Google just by starting to search. But they're a great place to start. Takes the work off you.
I think the key is to keep it really simple. Like even with those 25, if I Googled that on Hatch, it's likely I've got them somewhere, but up here. But I think there's kind of US and there's international. And it's like the simple way of looking at it is Vanguard has put together an ESG US fund. And so what Vanguard has done is saying, here's over 1,000 companies that kind of fit our ESG criteria, and you can basically spread your money across 1,000 US companies. And so I'm invested in the US share market's great.
Right.
Same thing with international. They're like, here's a group of international companies. And then I think I think there's a water one in there I saw. Yeah. But also there's BlackRock, which is iShares. If people know that. And it's worth
just, if you are on Hatch or want to write these down, BlackRock and Vanguard, two big fund managers.
Big fund managers.
Worth Googling and looking up as well.
Yeah. And they kind of they make that. So just, it's interesting. And you can even learn a little bit about them and their ESG practices, because I think there's quite a bit of controversy with them in the past years about, maybe some of the practices. But I think 2021 is definitely the year, we're seeing massive, I think there's like over $50 trillion in these funds now. And so there's a real interest to.
Which shows it's sustainable practices, because people are starting to look.
Yeah.
And I think we can dig into those fund managers a little bit later.
Cool.
But on that note, sort of about that sort of the conflicts or the different ideas about ESG and what it means. I've always found it surprising as sort of not even closeted environmentalist or hardcore optimist, ethical weirdo from my youth, is that ESG, again, you just have this ethics slant on it. So quite often I find when you look at a score for a company, it's quite different from what I'd expect it to be. Because you look at a company, you think, oh, they're so good and they're doing such good. Yeah. Are there any surprises? Have you seen any kind of surprises with companies in their scores?
I would say one surprise and one like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I think the one surprise for me was Beyond Meat.
Oh,
I know. Beyond Meat, most people love it because it's future food and feels so green. And actually the CEO says they take less water to make the substitute meat product burger than the proper burger, because you think of cows and grass and watering. But it actually takes more water to get that burger onto our plates. And so I think their supply chain, their logistics, all the agricultural requirements for all the stuff that's going into that burger, they're actually really unfriendly to the environment and generate a really big carbon footprint. So that was a big surprise. And I think it gives pause. I think the future of food is amazing. And anything disruptive, it just takes time.
When that goes back to that nice gray line of they might have a stated plan. Like they're at the beginning of this innovation. So you could invest or not invest based on that score. 44 immediately goes, oh, that's not sustainable. Or you go, but they're right at the start.
They're right. I think they're right at the start. And I think if you think of all the stuff that goes into the burger, the manufacturing of it, it probably comes from everywhere. Like it's not cows in America. We're talking whatever in Japan and whatever. So you've got all that stuff shipped somewhere. You've got to make it, and then you go and distribute it. So we get it at. Do we even have it? Burger Fuel?
I think a Burger Fuel has it. And
we're
Burger King.
So you add up all that stuff, and they don't have a great score. So it's just worth watching, and it'll be really interesting in a couple of years looking back at that.
Yeah, for sure.
And then I think the kind of like, oh yeah, that makes sense, was Tesla. Tesla being
she's out to get me.
Tesla being the Hatch fan favorite. And I think, a number of people have done very well with Tesla, but it's 31. So it's not as high as Beyond Meat. It's 31. So it is considered high. And again, batteries. We know that, the batteries of Tesla aren't recyclable. Batteries cause a massive problem in the tip, in that they never break down.
Again,
they cause leaching of chemicals. And so I do think, no doubt, Elon's goal, he would be an absolute driven, because that wouldn't have been his intention. It's just how tech is. And I think his goal is to solve that battery problem. But currently that's an environmental problem. I don't know if anyone has read about Elon Musk, but he's not the most traditional guy. Yeah, his unusual governance, and he's done some kind of dodgy things when it comes to running a business, from tweeting things to say he's going to take up his tweets, and smoking cannabis on a podcast, to saying you're going to take the company private. That stuff is your governance. You're going to get a really bad score, meaning high score. And then finally,
it's high risk
score. Yeah, and then working conditions. I think we know that he's famous for claiming he slept under his desk, which he would expect his people to,
absolutely.
and he would be ruthless at work. So I think the working conditions thing again reflects the risk of that ESG score on that business. So again, I've got some Tesla, and I'm not sure I would choose not to invest in it, but I really think education is empowerment, and the working conditions things bothers me, and that is a little bit weird, but
I like him weird. I just don't want to be his friend. But I think again that just goes back to, and I'm going to keep reiterating it, ESG is not about ethics. It's about the sustainability. And I think anyone who invests in Tesla, and the other thing I like about it is it's just good common sense. Like when you say it, you're right. It's of course, because yes, I know batteries aren't great yet. And yes, I mean, I even read a bunch of posts in Investors Club today, in our Investors Club, and just talking about his latest pathetic Twitter fight with someone. Anyone who invests in Tesla knows that's a risk. So again, it's not ethics. It's like, yes, there is a risk to the long-term sustainability of that company. Okay, so what about, now we've gone through my favorite companies and how they may not be as sustainable as I thought, although that is the joy of investing. You can put your own slant over it. What about companies that we might consider, or that have a reputation for sort of being the bad guys who have a good score? Because I think that sort of again shows it's not about ethics, it's about the sustainability of the company.
Okay, well, I mean, an obvious one sprouts to mind, and that would be Nike. Because when you say it, I think you think, oh, Nike sweatshops, and there's still that term, people just think, oh, Nike sweatshops. But they've done a massive amount of work. I think there was huge in the 90s, they got in big trouble with it, probably right through.
That reputation stuck.
And then I think they were outsourcing, and so it was like, okay, well, that one kind of degrees of removal is fine, but what about 3 degrees of removal? And so there's all these exposés on Nike. So traditionally known as baddies, they actually have a pretty good score. And I think their score is, what is their score? I might just quickly.
Is it
15? They have a score of 15, which is right in behind Lululemon. And so their score is considered low risk. And the reason it's considered low risk is they, since kind of being labeled this bad company, they've been on a massive pursuit of transparency. So they really want to be transparent about where your piece of clothing from Nike comes from. They've done a lot of work in the ethical supply chain. And so that the clothing that you're wearing is increasingly sustainable. They're looking at renewable materials. They offset their carbon footprint as well, and are also looking to kind of get into all their manufacturing into 100% renewable energy. So all that stuff's great, but we still know they struggle with a few things. And so 15 is not a perfect score. We know that they've struggled a little bit with diversity. They've got some fantastic ads, and I think they do some great ads. But even the one this year was the girls Don't Cry, the emotional one. Oh, it's so good. Obviously I'm a sucker for that stuff. But I think they've done some moves from diversity. But for anyone that wants to read a really great article about why Nike is Nike a responsible investment? Just Google that. Is Nike a responsible investment? And up will come an article from Motley Fool. I think I talked about them before. And it's just an analyst that basically writes, are they a responsible investment? And they're like, they're doing good on this, and they're doing bad on this, and they can improve on this, and they're doing good on this. And what it does is just shows all the complexity behind giving someone the score, and kind of how we can be like, okay.
Leave it to them to do.
Leave it to them to do. But I think it's just such a cool article on just generally speaking. Do I feel comfortable having Nike in my investment, which I do for my son? My son has, some Nike, and I can kind of be like, look at all the work they've done there. Yes, they need to do a little bit of work in this area. But again, I think shareholder pressure, which we'll talk about that a little bit, is forcing, there's a huge desire for people to invest and do good. And they want their businesses to be good as well as they grow, and kind of we benefit from their success. So that's a pretty interesting one.
Okay. Well, so I want to say 3 things to that. One is, everyone, I hope you've got your notepads pads out because we've been dropping a lot of links tonight. 2 is I just caught myself in the camera and this drink is giant. Like, drinking
so I'm hiding mine.
But 3 is, and this kind of comes down to the ethics thing, is I still have, and I studied in marketing at university. They brought up Nike as this great showcase of marketing, and I don't want to invest in them, and I don't judge you for doing it. But I even though they've got a lower score and Tesla has a higher score, I just disagree with them. And like, how do you get past that when it comes to ESG?
Well, with ESG, well, first of all, choice, right? You don't need to, that's a great thing about self-directed investing, but ESG actually isn't about ethics. And so if you were an ESG investor and it really is, you have to be comfortable with investing in Nike, because they've got if you believe they've got a really good business model, they're going to grow and be around in the future, they're actually running their company as though they're going to be around in the future.
That's true.
So you kind of have to put ethics aside if you're an ESG investor. But I think what you're maybe talking about is the other one, which is kind of responsible investing. So I think we can talk about that in a minute. But I know, they've done some great, they've taken some great strides to change. And if more and more and more investors are demanding these businesses to be better, they're just going to get better at doing that.
And that is the individual choices. Do you go with what's sustainable, or do you really back like that weird gut feeling that you have?
I think Facebook's probably a good one. There's some fund managers, Vanguard actually, I think, they've been criticized that in their ESG fund, because don't forget, you're going to have the likes of Facebook in an ESG fund. They've got a score of 24. And I think, me personally, I don't like Facebook and the whole, data privacy breaches and how they're run. And I'm not a huge fan, but score of 24 is not too bad. I think that's about medium. And it's probably due to some of the issues that they've had, even controversies actually included in that risk score. So obviously they've got lawsuits.
So nice how holistic it is, right?
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So anyway, so that again, if I'm an ESG investor, I kind of have to accept that Facebook has made it into that ESG fund because that's probably how the fund manager sees it, and it's okay. And again, it's not an ethical investment I'm making. But yeah, we should maybe chat about, well, why don't we chat about that? So I want to chat about kind of my values and how would I invest, like putting ESG aside, how might I invest in kind of my values?
And I think it's so interesting having this conversation, which is obviously hopefully helpful for people watching. But I think this is the first time we've really gone this deep on talking about this stuff. And it's kind of funny to admit when you sort of run an investing platform, it's like all of the stuff we're all learning all the time. And I think I keep saying about the ethics and not the ethics because it's taking a while to drum it into my brain. So I think Hatch has always been about backing what you believe. And I love this framework, and I'm actually going to use it a lot more now because I think it's sort of really deep diving into it over the last couple of weeks has kind of taken it from this sort of theoretical thing. But backing what you believe is sort of something that I have always found with investing, even way back when people used to talk a lot about financial statements and how to analyze a company, is that actually, for me, it's always come down to the companies that I believe in. And I think that's how you felt, and that's how we set up Hatch. And it's sort of the most obvious starting place. And I think part of that is, and we've sort of laughed a little bit about judgment tonight, but everyone has their own set of ethics. And who am I to tell you what you should invest in or buy or anything, and who are you to tell me? And I think that's one of the coolest things about being a human is all of us try and be the best humans we possibly can, but we also all have different things that really interest us. So one person might really, really care about the environment and really want to back green power. I obviously invest in Tesla despite their terrible ESG score, but I truly believe in the future. I think the future that they may have, where we have safer cars and safer roads, and that they will fix that battery issue, and it will be more sustainable. So to me, the second part, which is, I suppose we talked about ESG, which is about as we keep reminding ourselves, about actually sustainable long-term investing. The second part is socially responsible, which is yes, absolutely making a return, because we're here to sort of grow that long-term wealth, to make that life-changing wealth. But also part of it is to change our lives, but also change the future of the planet. So I think that that is one of the coolest parts about investing. A lot of us, and I was having a conversation the other day about buying free-range eggs and how our habits have changed in that a lot of us invest in in companies that truly do align with our ethics. And I think that you can invest in individual companies through Hatch that really you don't even need to do any of this analysis. You can just say, I actually believe in what they're doing, or you can Google them. Or again, funds that, like, we have that SHE fund, SHE, which is only invest in companies that have a diverse leadership. That's
women at the top end.
That's cool. So what would you say? I mean, that's kind of a it's slightly less structured because it is about sort of going into companies that you believe in.
Yeah, well, it's so interesting because with KiwiSaver, I think coming from Canada, like, that is nuclear energy. It's where energy is so cheap. So coming here, all of a sudden, it's like no nuclear and nuclear weapons and nuclear anything. And so that's been, really interesting to kind of learn of that. But I do like that really strong stance New Zealand takes. I like that my KiwiSaver is not in any of that bad stuff. But then if I want to choose to invest in stuff, then that's like my choice. I kind of know my KiwiSaver sorted, but I can choose to kind of back what I believe. And I definitely agree. That's what I was saying earlier. Like, I probably won't use the ESG for my companies, although it is nice to know. Yes. And I think it is nice just to know Beyond Meat, which is, you're probably investing in that for innovation, and Tesla, and like future food, and like recognizing, and even space stuff. Like, I can't imagine space stuff that's like, space stuff probably has high ESG, or
higher risk.
And
it's logical because they are early stage innovative companies. There's risks involved.
So kind of makes sense. Whereas I think like oil and all that, that probably makes more kind of academic sense as to why those scores are higher. But I would just say with backing what you believe, I think there's absolutely, I talked about the CEO, get comfortable with their mission and vision. There's probably a fantastic article out there on them that you can read about them. And then actually with funds, back to that funds thing, is if I don't want to choose a company, like say I want to, the SHE thing was good. I recognize all these really cool companies with minorities and leaders and females in leadership. I think that's really cool. But if I like a sector, like, I don't know, gaming, or then I believe that gaming is going to grow. I can't imagine there's an ESG or socially responsible one, but that's kind of a thing of back what you believe. But there probably is a clean energy one. There probably is. There's some really popular solar, wind funds and clean energy funds.
Well, and I think that goes back to, again, it's okay to not be perfect, and it's okay to back what you believe. And I think I've been having a lot more conversations recently about cryptocurrencies, and
that's interesting.
It's so ethical on one side, right? Changing the nature of how we pay for things around the world. But the cost, literally, the environmental cost of creating a Bitcoin is ridiculous at the moment.
I know.
So again, it's like you can't always get it perfect. And that's what I like about the ESG thing. And I think while we've kept harping on about it not being an ethics-based approach, it is a sustainable long-term business approach. It actually does give you a little bit of a basis when you because we have been digging into a few of these companies and individually looking around, and you start to get this little thing of like, oh, it scored badly on that, but I actually really care about that. Okay, cut. Or actually, I didn't realize it was quite good at that, and so I'm going to investigate that a bit more. Because you have to. I mean, everything in the world is if only people gave us a handbook on day one and told us what was right and what was wrong. But it's actually okay to back what you believe, and if you think the benefits of Tesla or Bitcoin or whatever it is outweigh the other things that they're not doing well, go for it. And I don't think there should be any judgment around it. And I actually think having more conversations like this, I've just seen a comment from Brody saying it's fantastic information, but it's actually more importantly fantastic to have conversations and like really not judgmental conversations and not greenwashing and not pretending to do good, but just kind of talking about this stuff, because investing is never framed like this. It's never framed as something that you can do good for the world. So so anyway, so on that front, we've talked a lot about doing good and a lot about ethics and sustainable business. One of the biggest questions I think I had, and we get asked a lot, is do I have to choose between the two? Do I have to choose between doing good for the world and making money for myself, because that's quite a big thing to weigh up.
Well, the quick thing with ESG is about making money. So that's
True.
a good thing, is because it's like, if we're investing, we're buying slices of businesses or a bucket of businesses, a fund, for a long, long time. So it actually is about making money. So there's been a number of studies that talk about ESG maybe in the short term, taking some dips as some of these industries like renewable energy.
Long-term
but it's a long-term thing. And so studies recently have found that ESG investments, anything kind of in the ESG space, have done just as well, if not better, than their non-ESG counterparts. So that's the good news, is that we don't.
Great news.
Yeah,
that's actually great news.
Yeah, and I think we just look at over the long term, we kind of recognize human behavior is changing, right? Like we're moving away from smoking. I think smoking rates are really dropping.
Vaping.
Yeah, vaping. I know, God, let's not talk about that. But I think we've got people are moving away from petrol cars into EVs.
They're dressing more casually.
Yeah, where it's Casual Wednesday, by the way. Nat's wearing her hatch hoodie for anyone who doesn't recognize the hatch hoodie, but she's wearing it. We're about to do a winter
work from home day today. I was like, I can't change.
It's okay, girl. We gotcha. If anyone wants a hatch hoodie, like we've got those coming, and we're gonna have
2021 edition.
Sorry, that was like really sticking that in there. But I think there's interest in using renewable forms of energy to heat our homes, and we know Joe Biden, just as an example, in the US, is investing billions of dollars in his kind of green energy plan. And so we know that these sectors are kind of energizing. And what happens when you have huge interest in these sustainable industries is tons of money flow into them. Conversely, if less people are driving petrol cars, if less people are smoking, if less people are drinking, we have money sucking out of those businesses and sectors. And when companies are starved of cash, they can't reinvest, they can't innovate, and so they can't grow. So again, that's kind of that's why sustainable thing works.
And it's not ethics, it's sustainable because it's good business practice, right? It's following the trends. And it's knowing, for sure.
Yeah. So in terms of I'm a shareholder and I'm feeling, pretty good. Funds, we'll talk about that, I think. But how else might I invest and do good? Is there, how can I influence a company to do good? And so say, like I said, I invest in some companies that maybe they're not considered ESG, right? But I'm like, it's just, I really want to own a slice of that business. How can I influence their practices, or am I just, a slave to whatever they do?
Well, I think this is one of the most misunderstood things about investing is, and we can't say it enough, you are a shareholder. You own a slice of that company. You are a part owner, which actually gives you a lot of power. And I don't know if anyone listening tonight followed along when the GameStop situation happened. And leaving all that out of it, the biggest lesson I got out of it is that retail investors, because everyday investors like us, because of the quantity of us now, we have created this giant movement and we are now forced to be reckoned with. So that's kind of the first thing that for the first time this year, I think the world stood up and took notice that it's not these investment funds anymore. It's actually people like us, and sort of like the power to the people, the way we vote in our own elections to elect our government. Everyone who owns shares in a company directly, and that's important to note, directly. So with Hatch, and not all platforms have this, but with Hatch, because you own your shares directly, you actually have a vote. You have one vote per share. Something like that. The more shares you own, the more power you have. And again, because everyday investors now own a chunk of these companies, we can band together. So that's one thing. So when you own shares in a company through Hatch, you actually, and I've just been getting a flood of these emails at the moment because I
got Roku today.
Yeah, there's a few cool ones coming out that you get to go in and have a say on some of the big decisions that the company's making. Absolutely, you probably comparatively own a small number of shares, but together, everyday investors actually really do start to, and that's where participating in things like Investors Club and stuff. We have 100,000 investors on our platform now, and we've started to have those conversations about how could we band together and have a better voice. The other cool thing about Hatch, and this is kind of one of those things about technology and how everything's sort of just combined recently and is starting to actually you're starting to see the impacts, is we have this awesome partner called Say, and basically their purpose is to allow investors to have a say. So we've been part of this really cool trial that hopefully continues, and it starts to become embedded in the idea of share ownership, that not only can you have a vote, you actually now can, before these companies like Tesla recently had their quarterly call, every investor was able to submit a question or upvote or downvote other questions. And the top 5 questions from just investors like us were actually the first things that the board and the leadership team of Tesla were asked in their calls.
Cool.
Never before has that happened. So,
and you can join those calls.
Absolutely. So you can listen to, and again, technology's come into play there. Now everyone can see them. It's not hidden in a room that you have to be in the place. You can participate at that level. And I think we're just seeing the very beginning of that. Like, there's some cool examples from the past, but we're only just starting to realize our power as a group. And we had some great discussions, and even a comment on our Investors Club afterwards was with those questions. It was actually some of the most popular YouTubers that had their questions asked, and someone was frustrated. And I said, again, we have a community. How do we work together to get the things we think are important to us?
That's cool.
So so I think that stuff is is pretty cool. Or you can keep it pretty simple and just act in a fund, invest in a fund that and
then how would you have a say? I think that's the interesting thing, is as shareholders in a particular company, we've got to say, we've got to vote. And if you're with Hatch, you've been getting those emails because it's it's kind of voting, it's AGM season, voting season, and so you have a vote, and you can actually vote Elon Musk, up or down, directors up or down. I don't like that. Directors are all men. I vote that down. And I just think the more and more of us get behind it,
it's like voting in our national elections. You have to use that voice. And who knows? Today it feels like we might not have that much power. The 3 years since we've been operating, how much that's changed.
Well, it's changed from 2019 was 10% of all US investors were everyday investors like us. 30% of all of the money invested now. 30%.
And that's in a couple of years. It's gonna. So have your say. I think absolutely have your say.
But with funds though, you don't actually have your say, and so that's something you actually give up your say as being part of a fund, and it's the fund manager. So we talked about a couple names earlier, Vanguard and BlackRock. They're the big ones, and they're the ones that actually vote on your behalf. And so again, all everyday investors and just kind of noise has kind of really put a lot of pressure on these 2 big fund managers to vote the way we want them to vote. And so we're actually seeing, I think there's been a little bit of nerves up until 2020. It was like, there's not a lot of pressure in these climate areas and diversity and whatnot. But what we're seeing is some great movements. I know Vanguard has just hired an entirely new ESG team, which is really great. And then BlackRock, they were in the news last week. I saw that they voted against, meaning they voted to fire the directors of the company because they weren't doing 53 companies because they weren't doing enough on climate change. So BlackRock, which holds like $9 trillion of people's money and all of these funds that they run, they basically can go have a huge amount of clout and say, we are not happy with how this business is run. And this wasn't even ESG. This is just general companies in their funds.
Thing, right?
That's the ethics thing. We're like, we're not happy with how this business is being run. And they voted against. And so we're starting to see this real activism of investing, which is kind of what you're chatting about, banding together, making companies do good.
So they're doing it on a large scale on investors' behalves at the moment. And I think that's kind of cool, because you sort of pick a fund company that aligns with your values and leave them to do the work on your behalf. And probably they're listening to their customers as well and starting to be influenced, and they've got all these shares that they can.
Because it's just good business, when you run a business well and you treat people fairly and you pay equitably and you have a diverse range of opinions and you're not harming the earth and you're supporting your local community. I mean, it's great.
It's exciting.
It is super exciting. And so I like Nat, I want to get started now. We're closing it. We've got 8 minutes left, and just tell me how I can get started with kind of investing in general. I think you've talked to me about ESG. I can type in ESG. I can find the company ESG score. But just generally, I'm like, okay, I've got, a few $100s or $500 sitting in my savings account.
Good in theory.
Tell me what. What do I do?
Well, we've actually talked a little bit about risk tonight, and the risk of a company not being sustainable in the future. And I think risk is such an interesting word when it comes to investing. And I like to shock people because I don't think people think about it. The biggest risk most of us have in life is not starting, because you risk working for every single cent you ever earn in your life. And who wants to do that if there's an easier option? I'm a lazy person. I like to find a shortcut, and putting my money to work for me is just the biggest way to lower that risk of having either not to be able to live the life that I want to live, or having to work for so long to just get where I could get by just making slightly different decisions. And we see this all the time. People sort of conflate investing with this giant mountain, and you have to get everything right. And again, I think when it comes down to what we've been talking about tonight, it's such a good analogy. No company is perfect, so don't try and be perfect. Just go for good enough. And I think it's the same with starting to invest. You don't have to know everything. You don't have to get it perfect. You just have to start, and there is no one right way to do it, as there is no one set of ethics. So break it down into small steps and just do one thing. So again, and we like to talk about this a lot, because people sort of think of investing, and I always use the like trading stocks thing. It's like this weird widgets that are commodities that no one understands. You are buying a small slice of a business. We buy, I don't know about everyone listening, but we often will spend $100 on a night out, or probably slightly more on a pair of shoes or a pair of jeans or something. Very ethically sourced. Why not take that $100 and invest in your education by investing in a business you believe in? And I think especially people who are tuning into this webinar, they really care about making a difference in not only their own future, but the future of this planet. So take that $100 and just start small. $100 is enough to have skin in the game. So you're not sort of just dabbling with an amount that kind of sets you up to think about it as almost like gambling. You're actually investing real money. And I think that's really important, because you care. I don't want to lose $100. So you're actually sort of taking it quite seriously. But if you lose it, you lose it. Like it's the cheapest education you'll ever get. And then one of the other things we've heard a lot from people, because most of our investors are pretty high achievers, is, well, I'm not going to change my life with $100. I disagree. You are changing your life with $100, because that $100 is the difference between you putting this off for years and years or starting today, and you will be in a different position in years and years. You'll start to increase that amount naturally. We've seen it. We see it every day. So I think, again, like just start with that $100. And if you care about making an impact, think about it like shopping. Like the way all of us who have, a lot of us are very purpose-led. And I love the fact that the generations coming through now, Kristen's got this incredible daughter who puts us all to shame with her like really strong beliefs about how the world should be lived, how we should live in the world. No one's going to get it right all the time. You buy free-range eggs, but I don't know where the fabric in my active my skirt, my t-shirt wear comes from. So it is impossible to live a perfect life. So just start and do your best and learn as you go. Make the mistakes. Try searching Google for an ESG company, a company in the ESG rating. Pick one that you think is a company that you feel that you're proud to back, and that you're proud to say, I'm a shareholder, and that you would walk down the street. And I think Lululemon's such a great example. You can walk past the shop and say, I own a slice of that company. And you will make mistakes, but just start and learn from them. And I think we've got, even for those that want to do a little bit more maybe academic or just want to work their way up to it, we've got a great Hatch Getting Started course as well. So Hatch Getting Started course, sorry, Haley, we didn't prep you with that one, but she's going to put a link at some point to the Hatch Getting Started course. And that's a 10-day course. It gets emailed to you, and you just got a little task every day, helps you understand what breaks it down. Yeah, because normally with this webinar, we kind of break down what's a share market and what's a share in a company, and what's a stock, and what's risk, and how comfortable are you with ups and downs of these things. And so it talks you through all of that stuff, and then it actually gets you set up with a Hatch account just to buy your first share. Yeah, and it can just be $100. And so we'll put that up for those that just want a little bit more time and just want to take a bit of action there. And before you wrap up, because I know you're going to wrap up, I just think just listening to all those words and the Getting Started course, I think that is the other thing to remember, especially, and we've read about this a little bit recently, so it's top of mind, but especially women have this idea that I'm the only one who doesn't know what those terms mean. And I didn't know. I've been investing for years before I figured out what most of those mean. You're not the only one. No one knows what they mean. Even hardcore investors tend to not know what most of them mean. So don't be put off by that stuff. Just go through the course. We have a ton of information. You'll learn step by step. You do not need to know everything to make a start. And I think we have a million things that can help you take that first step. And I really encourage everyone to do it, because it will change your life. It will change your life. Now you're allowed to
because you're living your best life with the hoodie work.
I don't even need to get dressed to work anymore, because investing changed my life.
But just for those that don't have ESG investments, like I own one of the most popular, some shares in the most popular fund in the world, which is Vanguard's S&P 500. And it spreads my money across 500 of the top companies, most recognizable companies in the world, basically, on the US share markets. And that's cool. Like, I don't think there's any shame, again, in being in these really innovative tech, like fantastic
because
businesses.
You presume that they have low risk of being unsustainable.
I suspect some will, some won't, although NVIDIA I know is in there, and they've got a good score. But yeah, like, look, it's okay. It just means this is another tool in your tool belt when you kind of approach investing and be like, I want to be empowered with why I'm investing and how and all that stuff. So some people will just take it really literally, and that's what they'll invest in, and others will just recognize, oh, that's a tool I can use to kind of learn a bit more about that company, which is really easy to do. So I think we're in a really enviable position these days, in that we can do good while we're making money. There's real power in the people, and we can help our planet with investing should we choose to. I think that's great.
And all power to you if you choose not to as well.
And I think it's super cool. It's a massive movement that's gaining traction. I think, hopefully we've got across the key points in doing that, so you feel a little bit more, when you hear this jargon, you feel a little bit more empowered. And I think, I think we'll wrap it up. Happy Wine and Wealth Wednesday to all.
Decided how big these glasses are. I haven't gone through it.
Thank you so much to Domain Road Winery. Fantastic support. Thank you so much. We'll get an email out to the winner. Have a great night to all, and we will catch you at the next Wine and Wealth. Take care. Good night.
Night.